Welcome physical audience, welcome online audience. Let's start with this event on university in times of climate crisis and what scientists can do as activists. So the structure of the event will be as follows. First, we will be hearing a 1-hour talk by Dr. Gardner. He is joining us from the Giertz Institute for Conservation and Ecology. He's a senior lecturer there, and he has recently written a paper on the role of scientists going from sitting in our offices publishing to taking direct action. And he also has personal experience as an activist. So he'll be giving a 1-hour talk. Then we will take a break, and those of us who are here will get coffee and cookies, and those of you who are home can get coffee and cookies at home. And then we'll come back for a 1-hour panel discussion where 4 scientists from an organization called Scientists Rebellion will come join us to talk about their experience with combining science with climate activism. And with that, I will turn it over to Charlie.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for being here. It's wonderful to see 135 people online as well as those there. Just give me a moment to share my screen. So thanks very much for that very kind introduction. I'm Charlie Gardner. I'm actually not a senior lecturer at the Lund Institute of Conservation and Ecology. I left my job last year to concentrate on other things. I still remain associated with the University of Kent, so I'm an associate senior lecturer. But over the last few years, I have been becoming so concerned by the news of planetary devastation and so concerned by the lack of any action by global leaders to do anything about it, that I am less and less motivated by doing research and educating students. These aspects of a scientist's role just don't seem to me to be well suited for an emergency context. Of course, science is hugely important. It has been hugely important in furnishing us with the knowledge we have today. But it hasn't been enough to change anything. And what we need to focus on now is how to achieve change, radical change in an emergency context. And I'd like to make the case that more research isn't going to do that. And as the people with the greatest knowledge, we are obliged to do more. So yeah, we're all here because we're concerned. We're in Sweden this morning. This is the temperature in Sweden for the since 1860, showing the divergence from the average. It's clearly getting a lot warmer. So far, we have reached an average of 1.1, maybe it's now 1.2 degrees over pre-industrial temperatures. And already at 1.1 degrees, we are seeing extraordinary weather events. Last year, there were 10 national temperature records set around the world, including the highest temperature ever recorded on planet Earth, 54.4 in Death Valley. And it was nearly 50 degrees in Canada, not the Sahara, Canada. And of course, this isn't just temperature records. In Italy, late last year, I think it was September, October, there was 74 centimeters of rain in one day in Italy. Just extraordinary weather events. And of course, this is costly. It's hugely expensive. Just last year, there were 20 related disasters in the USA that each cost more than $1 billion. We heard about the wildfires, we heard about the winter storms and the tornadoes. the hurricanes, but there were 20 of these things just in 1 year. So all these things are happening at 1.1 degrees. We are not staying at 1.1 degrees. I'm sorry, I don't have some better information here just to tweet, but we are not, governments of the world have agreed that 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures is a safe level of heating. Clearly, it's not safe from what we've seen already at 1.1, and it's hugely blind and disrespectful to people in communities already suffering to say that 1.5 degrees is safe. But what we're heading for, what we're trying to achieve is 2 degrees. We're not going to get there. Government pledges will see us to 2.4 degrees, but of course they will not meet their pledges because they haven't put in place any policies that will actually reduce emissions to allow them to meet those pledges. Where we're likely headed is above 3 degrees, perhaps even towards 4 degrees at this, within this very century. We simply have no idea what impacts 3 degrees of heating will have on human civilization because it's completely unprecedented. We've never seen anything like it. But a lot of people think, the consequences will be very serious indeed, and we'll come to that in a minute. Climate change, of course, impacts everything. It's not just an environmental problem. It impacts security, public health, the economy, development, everything. To talk about just a couple of those impacts, the impacts on the natural world, many of our most important and biodiversity-rich ecosystems may simply not exist within the next century or so. Of course, we've all heard about the disappearance of polar sea ice, and we've probably all heard about the disappearance of coral reefs as well, because corals are particularly susceptible to warm temperatures. But over recent years, we're seeing that even tropical forests may not survive climate change. They dry, they become vulnerable to fire and other threats. So the natural world is, ecosystems are falling apart because of climate change. In terms of impacts on the human world, well, like other species, humans have a particular ecological niche. There are certain conditions that we thrive in, certain conditions that we simply cannot survive in. And basically, we cannot survive in places that have a mean annual temperature of higher than 29 degrees. Currently, places with a mean annual temperature higher than 29 degrees cover less than 1% of the Earth's surface. They are these areas in black here in the Sahara. Under a high emission scenario, in just 48 years from now, areas that are uninhabitable to human beings will have expanded to cover areas that are currently home to 3 billion people. The northern half of Latin America, most of the Sahara, the Middle East, the Horn of Africa, Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia, New Guinea, Northern Australia. It's unimaginable what impacts this will have on human organization across the planet. We're going to see huge migration. We're going to see a change in agricultural patterns, change in settlement patterns. Everything about our planet as we know it now will be completely different within 50 years. This map is only looking at temperature rise. What about sea level rise, which will also destroy many of the world's great cities? The geographic patterns of human activity on our planet are going to completely change. The consequences could be so severe that we're facing the collapse of human civilization. When we're talking about 3 degrees of temperature rise, we have no idea whether civilization can survive this. Don't worry about this diagram. I know you can't read it, but the idea here is just to show you the complexity of the interrelated processes that keep our civilization going. This is from a paper last year looking at how civilization could collapse. They conclude that there is a very real risk of collapse due to simultaneous agricultural failure in several parts around the globe. And yeah, of course, for a long time, we've talked about these things as something that will happen to future generations. We're no longer talking about these things as things that are going to happen to our grandchildren. They will happen to our children and maybe even us. These are imminent things, on a scale of decades. So the situation is very, very serious indeed, and that's just climate change. We additionally are destroying the natural world. We're destroying and degrading habitats, we're over-harvesting species, we're disrupting ecosystems. We're introducing new species which invade and perturb existing ecosystems. We are poisoning our ecosystems to an incredible degree, not just with accidental pollution from plastic and things, but systematic poisoning of our agricultural landscapes, which is causing collapse of insect populations and things. And then, of course, climate change also affects the natural world. So we have these feedback loops. The destruction of the natural world and climate change are two sides of the same coin. I know we all fall into the trap of talking about the climate crisis, but this is really a climate and ecological crisis. Climate change threatens the natural world, both directly and through human responses, but the destruction of nature accelerates climate change. So we need to address both together. We have these two massive crises. They are so serious that last year there was 2 years ago there was a paper published, World Scientists Warning of a Climate Emergency. Over 11,000 scientists signed this. At the time, it's now over 13,000 scientists have signed it. Many of you, I'm sure, are signatories to this paper. This paper basically it summarizes lots of trends in planetary systems and processes, and it concludes clearly and unequivocally that planet Earth is facing a climate emergency. This is an emergency, and this word emergency was not chosen lightly. It was chosen very, very carefully. Because an emergency, the word emergency does not only describe our situation, it also implies a response. An emergency requires us to act. As Greta Thunberg says, I want you to panic. I want you to act as you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if your house is on fire, because it is. If I looked out of my window now and saw that my neighbor's house was on fire, I would take emergency action. I would not do the things I would normally do. I would do things differently because it's an emergency. Normally, when I go around to my neighbors, perhaps I'll text her first to ask if I can come around. And then I will go and I will politely knock on the door. But if her house is on fire, I will not politely knock on the door. I will go there, I will run there, and I will kick the door down. So this is what an emergency means. Emergency means you stop everything and you focus on the urgent task at hand because nothing else matters. So why has academia not reacted as if it's an emergency? It was academics that said it's an emergency, and yet we just carry on our daily lives, writing our papers, one more grant proposal. This is not emergency action. So how should scientists react in this planetary emergency? Well, I'm taking from my starting point here that we are scientists because we have a drive, a desire to improve the world, improve society, I don't know, make things better. That's why we do what we want to do. So we need to think about our basic assumptions here. If we became scientists to make things better, and everything is getting a lot worse, then maybe our theory of change for how science makes things better is faulty. Maybe we need to re-examine our assumptions. So I've been thinking a bit about science's theories of change, and I think there are a few different ways that we expect our research will make the world better. First is we just think, okay, if we generate information, if we tell the world what needs to be done, the leaders of society, our governments, they will use that information to make the best decisions for everybody, for the greater good. Another assumption we have is that if we warn the public of the consequences of inaction, if we tell the public what we've learned, then the public will force their leaders to take action. And then perhaps a change is that we generate solutions, answers to the problems, and then of course governments and the rest of society will fund those solutions so the solutions get implemented. Well, unfortunately, all of these theories of change are based on false assumptions. They are completely naive because they don't pay attention to how the real world works. So this first theory of change, our job as scientists, we generate the information, publish the papers. Maybe some of us will even grow to great efforts to translate the papers into policy briefs. We'll translate our information into a package that policymakers, our leaders, can use. The thing is, they are not listening to us. Governments are driven by an economic growth imperative, and they respond to corporate lobbyists and, to a lesser extent, to public pressure. Climate change is all the evidence we need to demonstrate that governments don't listen to scientists. They listen to corporate lobbyists. It has been over 40 years since scientists have been telling governments about the problem of climate change. That whole time, fossil fuel industries and neoliberal fundamentalists have been investing in government inaction. It's been over 30 years that we've had global meetings. The UNFCCC first met was created in 1992. We have emitted more greenhouse gases since we agreed to stop them than we ever did before. We've emitted more in full knowledge than we ever did in ignorance. And this is because fossil fuel industries are investing in inaction. They do it in two ways: political contributions and lobbying. So just in 2020, fossil fuel industries spent almost $250 million in financing of politicians in just one country, just in the USA. And of course, this is just publicly available data about contributions. George Monbiot talks about the pollution paradox, whereby the dirtier your industry, the more you have to spend in political funding to ensure that you don't get regulated out of existence. Therefore, governments end up operating for the benefit of the dirtiest industries. So simply generating information is not going to work because governments they've been captured by fossil fuel industries, essentially. What about this second theory of change? The idea that if we warn the public about what's happening, the public will force their leaders to take action. Well, the problem with that is, firstly, the public is misinformed. The public is, we are all victims of a huge and very well-funded misinformation campaign that spent, decades trying to persuade us that climate change wasn't happening or that it wasn't caused by greenhouse gases. they've now moved on from that, and they're now focusing on delay rather than denialism, talking about why we shouldn't act. But yeah, the fact is the public just does not think it's an emergency. Nobody knows how bad it is. On top of that, on top of the misinformation, there is a lack of information. The media simply do not cover these things as emergencies. To give an example, the word cake was mentioned 10 times more than climate change on UK TV in 2020. It's just ridiculous how little attention the media and the world really has paid to scientists' warning of impending disaster. So this theory that, you know, all we need to do is communicate our work and others will take action, that's also false. And then there's this idea that we generate solutions, those solutions will be implemented. Unfortunately, this also isn't true. In every sector that you look at, you know, from agriculture, transport, whatever, we have solutions, we have better ways of doing things. These are not the mainstream solutions, partly because of market forces, and you know, our governments are not using their power through subsidies and taxes, etc., to alter the markets to favor better things. But also, yeah, the public doesn't think these things are important, so the public doesn't fund them either. So I'm a conservationist, and there's clear examples from this in conservation. In conservation, we have the answers, right? We know how to protect biodiversity, but we don't have the funding to do it. So to give you an example, the entire global spending on protected areas, parks and reserves to conserve ecosystems and biodiversity, global spending on that is about the same as the size of the global beard grooming industry. The world cares as much for functioning ecosystems as it cares for beards. It's just absolutely crazy. So these science isn't working to make the world better in the way that it needs to be. Science alone cannot trigger the transformative change that is needed at the speed that is needed, because it ignores the processes that most powerfully influence political and policy change, and it does not address the forces that are heavily invested in maintaining the status quo. Scientists thought that this whole game was about information, but actually it's always been about power. This is not an information deficit problem. That means generating more information will not fix it. And we know this. We know this. That's why many of us in our private lives, we also spend our time doing other things. We write letters to our representatives, we sign petitions, and if things get really desperate, we go on a sanctioned march from A to B. But that's not enough either. That hasn't worked either. So what else can we do? Well, if we look at history and we look at the mechanisms that have generated major social change through the last century or so, we see that one of the biggest drivers has been non-violent civil disobedience. From the suffragettes protesting and campaigning for votes for women in the UK in the early part of the last century, the civil rights movement in the US, Mohandas Gandhi and his struggle for independence from the horrors of empire, gay rights in the 1980s. These things were all campaigned for using non-violent civil obedience, which is the refusal to obey certain laws, orders, or commands of a government. And civil disobedience works in a number of ways. Of course, by creating trouble for the government, it makes the government's life more difficult and pushes for change that way. But it helps break the media silence. The media will be reluctant to cover issues, but they will cover disobedience about those issues. We saw that the media doesn't talk about climate change, they would rather talk about cake. But the media does like to talk about climate protesters, and you can't talk about climate protesters without talking about climate change. But civil disobedience also, it doesn't just get into the media, it also communicates the importance of the issue to the public. Why would people be doing these things if they weren't so important? Why would people make such sacrifices? Why would people risk arrest if these things weren't important? Maybe they are important. Maybe we should think about them. So civil disobedience is a powerful, method. And since about 2018, there's been a huge increase in civil disobedience for climate and the environment. And this is around the world, most famously, Giertz in Sweden, but also Extinction Rebellion, which started in the UK in 2018 and has spread globally. There's Ende Gelände in Germany, Sunrise Movement in the US. That all over the world, people are rising up and taking to the streets to demand a future, to demand a habitable planet. And this is having major impacts. In the UK, it has had a huge impact. Public concern for the environment and climate change was higher in November 2021, 2 months ago. It was the #1 concern for the public in the UK, more than crime, immigration, the economy. None of it was as important as climate change. On the top right-hand side here, this is the front page of a right-wing British newspaper last year. The bottom right shows a photo from the leadership debate before the general election 2 years ago. And on the bottom left, the headline, the UK Parliament declares climate emergency. So civil disobedience, protest movements for the climate have had a huge impact already. They have changed the national conversation. Climate change is everything that people are talking about today. It was not in 2019. The change has been because, in large respect, because of activism. So activism is working. It's just not enough yet. It started to get the ball rolling, but of course, it's very early doors. I attended Extinction Rebellion's first international rebellion in April 2019. And when I was there, I was talking to lots of people. I just went down there by myself. I wasn't part of a group. I was talking to lots of people, and I met lots of old people. I met young people. I met lawyers. I met doctors, but I didn't meet many scientists. And I thought that was really odd that scientists weren't there. So I went home and started chatting to a friend, and we wrote this paper that we published in Nature, Ecology and Evolution. And it was a bit of a sensation. On the top right here, we see the Altmetric score. This is a metric which measures online activity around papers. And this paper is in the top few thousand most talked about papers online. Out of 21 million papers, it's in the top 4,000 most talked about. So clearly, lots of scientists were intrigued by scientists saying that we need to do more than just talk and write. We need to act. And of course, this is not a new idea. Einstein himself said, if knowledge comes with obligations. We need to act. As the people that really know, we can't just sit back and do nothing. And of course, scientists taking action is part of a long and noble tradition. James Hansen of NASA, it was James Hansen that gave the testimony to Congress in 1988 that really woke up the world about climate change. He has been arrested. Lynn Crombie and Alejandro Fried, that's it. They've been arrested for blocking tar sands in in the US and Canada. Scientists taking action is not a new thing. It does have quite a noble tradition. In 2019, after Extinction Rebellion started, a group called Scientists for Extinction Rebellion was formed. And I'm sure we'll hear more about this group later, and I would encourage you to join them. With Scientists for XR, so Scientists for XR was formed as a group of scientists to endorse Extinction Rebellion, to show our public support for them. And several hundred scientists signed this declaration of support, saying the actions of Extinction Rebellion are justified. They are doing the right thing. As scientists, we agree, we support them. And that was covered by Reuters. That was a good thing. But personally, I think scientists have to do more than just support these groups. We need to join them. We need to be at the heart of them. As well as Scientists for Extinction Rebellion, there is another group, Scientist Rebellion. It is Scientist Rebellion that is hosting this event today. Scientist Rebellion is an international group, much more international. Scientists for Extinction Rebellion. We have groups in several countries across Europe and across the world. In November last year, we took part in the first ever mass arrests of scientists anywhere in the world over the climate and ecological crisis. This happened at COP26. 21 of us were arrested for blocking a bridge. This is me in the blue hood here, and our friend Anders, who will be on the panel later, from XR Sweden, who traveled from Sweden to Glasgow to join this. And this generated a lot of media attention. It was covered in Nature, but more importantly, it was covered by the mainstream media in the UK. I was invited onto BBC Radio Scotland before we did this, because I had told them that I was going to get arrested. They would never have invited me onto national radio if I had not told them about my intentions. And herein lies the power of direct action. It gets you on the news. So why, sorry, I don't know how I'm doing for time. I'm probably taking too long. I'll try to hurry up. Why should scientists engage in nonviolent civil disobedience? Well, there's a very important messenger effect. We add legitimacy to these movements. These movements are often dismissed by politicians and the media as hippies, unemployed people. Basically, the media try to tell the public that these people are not like you, and these people are not respectable. But by taking part as scientists, by engaging not just as citizens, but explicitly as scientists, we undermine that argument. We say, actually, we are not just unemployed hippies. We are people from all segments of society, and we are respectable. Thank you very much. Sorry, I keep on getting messages that my connection is unstable, so I hope you're still able to hear me okay. But there is a very important messenger effect here. It's if people that are respected take action, that is more powerful. Scientists also have access to platforms. People invite me to speak to them because of these two letters in front of my name. It says doctor. And that opens doors for me. So I need to use that platform that I have. I mentioned the messenger effect. One of the things that really worries me is like a reverse messenger effect. If scientists say that it's an emergency, but then don't act like it, then we are saying to the public that actually I don't even believe what I'm saying. It's a very, very powerful negative message. If you say it's an emergency, you have to act like it's an emergency. And then I think there's a moral obligation element, particularly for planetary scientists. I showed the Einstein quote that those that have the privilege to know have the duty to act. Well, I think it's a bit more than that, because remember, these people are taking to the streets because of what we have told them. The reason children are not going to school on a Friday is because we have terrified them with the information we have shared. So how can we tell them to act and then not be there shoulder to shoulder with them? It just, I don't know, it's wrong. We have a moral obligation to be there with them on the streets. Of course, many scientists throw arguments against it. Of course, it's difficult. Nobody, I don't want to spend my time planning civil disobedience. I don't want to, risk arrest. Nobody does. So we make excuses. We put up barriers. We invent reasons why we should not do these things. One of the common barriers, excuses, is that scientists should be detached, neutral observers. We should generate information only, and we should not say anything about what we must do with that information. Because if we do that, then we're not neutral anymore, and we will have no credibility. Well, we need to examine where this idea comes from. The historian Amanda Power shows that this idea comes from the Middle Ages, when research was carried out by monks in monasteries. And basically at that time, the belief was that information, knowledge, comes from God. If you want to receive that information from God, then you have to be pure. You have to be an empty vessel. You have to be completely detached from the material world. So monks detached themselves from the material world. And this idea persists today. But actually, when you examine this idea a bit deeper, I don't think it's true. Now, if we look at medicine, medicine is an explicitly value-driven science. It is not a neutral science. Medicine has an objective to improve human health. And nobody would ever say that doctors have no credibility if they make policy pronouncements. And we see it all the time. Doctors warn against cuts to youth drug treatment. Doctors warn about COVID. Nobody would ever see that warning from a doctor and say, "Ooh, that doctor has adopted a position. That doctor is not neutral. I cannot trust that doctor. That doctor has no credibility." It's the same in my field, conservation. Conservation is an explicitly value-driven discipline, and it's completely normal for conservationists to make political statements. Agriculture should be done in this way for the benefit of humanity. We must stop deforestation for the benefit of humanity. These are political statements made by scientists, and we accept them, no problem. So if scientists can engage in advocacy, then engaging in activism isn't a change in neutrality, it's just a change in tactics. So this is nonsense, this idea that we must be detached. What if not being neutral affects our credibility? Well, when we look at experimental research, okay, this is only experimental research, but it seems to suggest that actually, the public do not lose respect for or their credibility that they hold scientists in is not reduced by scientists engaging in advocacy. So, that's also not true. I think beyond that, many academics feel other barriers to joining. Some might be scared that it will affect their job prospects. Some might be concerned that there is some social stigma within academia. Their colleagues will think less of them or other things. For me, actually, I think the biggest barrier is time. It's just time. Academia is incredibly competitive. It's increasingly precarious, so it's difficult to get a long-term job, particularly for early career researchers. And, if you look at top researchers, they all have one thing in common: laser sharp focus. They are completely committed to their research. And I think, if you want to reach the top, people just think that anything that does not contribute directly to your career, I can't afford the time for that. If it doesn't result in papers or citations, then I'm not interested. Well, firstly, I have news for you. The career, the dream future you are dreaming of, it's not going to exist. So don't waste your time devoting your entire life to it. There are no professorships on a dead planet. Think about what's important there. But also, I think it's unfair for us to expect scientists to have to do this in our own personal time. Many of us work for universities or other forms of research institution. If we look at the mission statements of these universities and research institutions, they always say things about wanting to contribute to society and make the world a better place. Well, we are in an emergency now. And if we want universities to contribute to make the world a better place, we argue that they need to facilitate their staff doing that. So in our paper, which I'm introducing now, we argue that universities should actively work to remove these barriers to activism amongst their staff. We suggest that universities should adopt policies to facilitate activism by academics. Many universities, they say that they want their staff to engage in public communication of science. They like it. They say that they like it when their staff engage in public communication of science, but they don't reward it. We suggest that, at the moment, work mandates of academic staff, it's basically research, teaching, and administration. We suggest there should be a fourth branch, and this is outward-facing work. Communication, advocacy, all this sort of thing. And that means they need to alter work allocation models so that whatever, 10% of your time, I don't know, it's an emergency, I would say 80%, but 10% of your time devoted to advocacy and activism. And these things should be recognized in hiring and promotion policies. This is important work that people are doing. It should be recognized. We also argue that we should be teaching about these things. We should be reforming our curricula to teach students about the real world, basically, to teach them about civic engagement and how change happens in the real world. To do that, staff will, of course, need to be trained. We also say that universities have to defend the rights of academics to protest and push back against emerging threats to academic freedom. And this is something that is increasing around the world. There are there are right-wing groups from the USA called Turning Point that are trying to create trouble for academics that they accuse of being left-wing or whatever. There are increasing threats to academic freedom, and universities have to defend this. It's not just academic freedom, but the freedom to protest. I was last year I helped organize this letter where over 400 academics from around the world wrote this open letters published in the Guardian, warning of this increasing criminalization of protests around the world. We're seeing this in a big way in the UK, where the government is trying to pass a law that could see activists sent to jail, imprisoned for 1 year merely for attending a protest. Academics have a really important role in helping fight against these really, really scary societal trends. So this is the paper we published. It's called From Publications to Public Actions, and it's about why and how academics should get involved in activism and how universities must support them. I'm sure we're going to spend a bit of time talking about this afterwards. Just to read a little from our conclusion. We suggest that the traditional academic roles of research and teaching are not sufficient to drive transformative change in a time of rapidly accelerating global crises. So those with the greatest knowledge and understanding of these crises have a moral obligation to provide leadership and engage in advocacy and activism. This is an important word here, leadership. I don't think I've used this word yet in this talk, and I think it's a very important concept. It underlies a lot of what I'm talking about. We need to show leadership. People respect us because we're scientists, so we need to lead the way. So given this, universities must reconsider their role in society and adapt their operational models to explicitly recognize engagement in policy and political processes as part of the work mandate of their staff and adopt mechanisms to facilitate and reward it. So we're saying it's an emergency. It's not only academics that have to act like it's an emergency, academic institutions have to as well. That means universities have to change. So just to finish off, I know getting involved with civil disobedience groups, it takes us out of our comfort zone, and it can be scary. But just to say that there are lots of things we can do that do not involve getting arrested. Not everybody in the Air Force is a pilot, and not everybody in climate activist groups is getting arrested. There are lots and lots of other roles that need to be filled behind the scenes. You can offer you can get involved with these groups to help with organizations and logistics. If you like doing art, you can make artworks. If you are interested in people's mental health and taking care of people, you can join a well-being group. If you can bake cakes and take them to the activists on the streets to show your support. You can, one of the most important things we can do is media work and offering public support for these. We can also offer our scientific expertise to these groups to make sure that other activists have the same knowledge we do. But also one of the most rewarding things I've done has been writing expert witness statements for activists who are in court. Now, in the last 2 weeks, there have been 2 jury trials of Extinction Rebellion activists in the UK. And in both of these trials, the jury, 12 randomly selected citizens, the juries found the activists not guilty. And the activists were, they weren't charged. And part of the reason they were found not guilty was because I wrote expert witness statements to support the defense of those activists. If scientists are not reading, if scientists are not providing expert witness statements for activists, then the juries in the court are not hearing about the science. This is a hugely important thing we can do, and it's a very easy thing we can do, and it is hugely rewarding. I've felt a buzz when my paper was published. I felt a buzz when my paper's been widely cited. It was nothing compared to the buzz I felt when these activists were found not guilty. Honestly, it's worth doing. And then finally, just to say that there are lots of other forms of civil disobedience that we can engage in that do not involve getting arrested. One thing that scientist rebellion activists do quite often is pasting scientific papers to buildings. I love this as an action. There is nothing that a scientist can do with more integrity than pasting a paper to a building. We have tried every way to communicate. No one's listening, so I'm going to communicate in this disobedient way. We can withdraw support for activities that that aren't appropriate in an emergency. Refuse to fly to a conference, refuse to take a work trip, and that's disobedience within your work, and that will influence your institutions. It's not just individuals and governments that have to change, it's our institutions. We can engage in educational disobedience. Don't give your normal lecture, but give a lecture about the importance of this. There are all sorts of amazing, creative ways that we can engage in civil disobedience. This picture on the right here is a group within Extinction Rebellion called the Dirty Scrubbers. You can get arrested for breaking the windows of Europe's dirtiest bank. You cannot get arrested for cleaning the windows of Europe's dirtiest bank. Lots of civil disobedience is performance art, so get creative. And just to leave you with this final quote from Amanda Power, this is the historian that did the research about the monks. She says, we should now be asking whether we still believe that the best thinking for the 21st century is really done at a remove from profound personal investment in a livable future. We have to be invested. We are not detached observers, and this is an emergency. Thank you very much, and I'm really excited to join other members of Scientist Rebellion to talk about Scientist Rebellion actions, and to talk about what we all can do over this next hour. And in the meantime, just remember, there are no professorships on a dead planet. Thank you.
So much, Charlie, for this really inspiring. Okay. Yes, absolutely. So thank you very much, Charlie, for a really inspiring talk. We will be taking questions for Charlie as part of the panel discussion, which will happen in 10 minutes after we all get some coffee and cookies. So see you in 10. All right, let's get started with the interactive portion of this event. So first, we would like to present to you the panelists, and maybe you can each just say hello really quickly, so you'll pop into view as I say your names. So the scientists, activists joining us from Scientist Rebellion today our first, Fernando Racimo. He's a geogeneticist at the University of Copenhagen. Fernando?
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm an associate professor at the Globe Institute at the University of Copenhagen and a member of Scientists Rebellion.
Wonderful. And then we have Laura Horn. She's a political economist at Roskilde University. Laura?
Yes, hello everybody, really nice that so many of you are here. I'm associate professor in the Department of Social Sciences at Roskilde University. I'm also a bit sniffly, so just sort of don't look at me while I'm coughing my way through a corona infection.
Thank you, Laura. And then we have Anders Giertz. He is a retired lecturer of social work from Lund University. He's actually here in the room with us. Hello, Anders.
Hello, can you see me now?
A little bit.
Yeah, I'm in a little special situation because I'm retired and I don't feel that connected to the academy now with formal titles and all of that. But I'm a researcher and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Anders. And then finally, we have Aitzkoa Lopez de Lapuente. She is a stem cell researcher at Lund University, and she's also in the room with us here.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know.
So before we start, Aitzkoa is going to present in a few slides what the organization Scientists Rebellion is all about. And meanwhile, you can start typing up your questions in the Q&A if you're online, or thinking of them if you're here with us.
Yes. So let's see if I can start my presentation. Okay. Can you see the presentation now? It's
Yes.
fine. Great. So thank you very much for coming. I'm very happy to be here and getting to. Yeah.
Could you share the screen on Zoom?
Sorry. I had done it already. Yeah. Is it okay now? Do you see the slides?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Sorry.
There, yes.
Okay. Okay, sorry for this. Yeah, so I'm going to tell you a bit more about Scientists Rebellion, hopefully to get your support and to get some of you to actively join us even. So, yeah, Charlie already said a bit about this, but I'm going to say it again. We are scientists and academics calling on our communities, our institutions, colleagues to stand in resistance against the inaction of governments on the climate and ecological crisis. Because we know that this inaction is putting us in a pathway to genocide, and this is something that we need to resist. And who else, if not us, that are at the institutions that generate this knowledge and that should disseminate this knowledge that will resist this. It's our obligation. So by resisting, we mean, as Charlie said, going beyond just writing academic papers, publishing them in our journals that we read, even going further than advising the governments, but we mean resisting by all possible means that we have, by non-violent civil disobedience, which we think is a very effective tool to create rapid progressive change, and we can talk more of that in the discussion. We evolved from Extinction Rebellion, which we have heard about. So now we are our own organization, but we still endorse their basic overarching demands, and we operate within their principles and values. We are more explicit than Extinction Rebellion, though, in that we challenge the premise of infinite economic growth, because all evidence points at that is simply not feasible if we want to have a livable planet. And we also emphasize very much that the transition to a post-carbon economy must be done with social justice, including, very importantly, North-South justice. And this is nothing new, it's in the Paris Accord. So it's stated there that the nations, the states that have more historical responsibility for greenhouse gas emissions are the ones that should fund the transition to a post-carbon economy. And also important to note that the wealthiest 1% of the world are responsible for 60% of the emissions. This 1% should also pay for the transition. So our demands are actually aligned with the demands of Extinction Rebellion. First is tell the truth. Very important here at universities when we have the knowledge and we have the obligation to communicate it with all its urgency and all its severity, taking into account the full implications for human societies. So teaching the students this, that we are in an emergency situation. Act now, of course, right now, not in 5 years, not in 10 years, not in 2050. The most recent IPCC report says that if we are to have a scenario that is compatible with a 50% chance of staying below 1.5, the emissions of greenhouse gases must peak between 2020 and 2025. We are in 2022 and still rising and accelerating. So act now. And of course, all these, we believe, must be done democratically. So we need a mechanism to strengthen democracy. As Charlie said it before, the current political system is captured by corporate interests, so they are not able to do the changes that are needed. So we propose to have citizens' assemblies, which would be randomly and representatively selected citizens sitting together, getting information from experts, scientists, also different stakeholders in the crisis, like indigenous communities, people in the front lines. So they would get informed and then they would negotiate a set of policies that would be then implemented by governments. We have 10 principles and values, and in the interest of time, I cannot go through all of them. I'm just putting them here just because I believe that they are maybe more revolutionary even than our demands. So there is this shared vision of change that is based on equity and justice, as we said before. We have a regenerative culture, meaning that we not only need to regenerate our ecosystems and our natural world, but also our relationship with each other. We need to have a more non-violent way of communicating, of relating to each other and taking care of each other. We openly challenge ourselves. We go out of our comfort zone. We don't stay in our academic institutions, so we go out on the street to do things that we don't usually do. We are non-violent, and we avoid blaming and shaming because we are in a toxic system, but it's no individual's fault that we are here. So we are all more or less like prisoners of the lack of choice that we have in the current system. So we are also an international movement, but we have many different subgroups, and here in Sweden and Denmark we have the Nordic group, and we have been working together for maybe a little bit less than 1 year now. People in Denmark have been starting before, but what we have done is, this is one of the most important actions that we did in Copenhagen in October last year, where we had a teach-in front of the climate ministry. So we had around 10-12 experts talking about different aspects of the climate and ecological crisis, demanding that the government listens to the science. And we blocked the road in front of the ministry. As we were doing that, we were widely featured in the news, in the main news channels in Denmark, and also in some Swedish media. And this was because we were blocking the road. So the headline was, "Scientists block the road in protest for climate change." This is how we got the attention. Then Charlie already mentioned this action in Glasgow, where Anders here and also Charlie were participating, also widely featured in the news and in the Nature journal, so very important as well. And then this was our last action last year. In December, we participated in a conference called Offshore Summit, which was basically a meeting of oil and gas executives in Denmark, also Norway and other countries, where they were discussing their plans for a green transition based on fossil fuels. So there were these oil and gas executives, there were politicians, and the meeting was supposed to be open to the public as well, if you paid the fee. So we did that, and we registered to the conference, and we planned to show there these posters that are, of course, critical with their view, showing that the premise of green economic growth is really not working, that there are magical solutions like carbon capture and storage don't actually work. So yeah, this was our plan, to go there and show the posters. But just before the conference, the day before, we got an email saying that our inscription had been cancelled in view of recent events, which we think means participation in the teach-in in Copenhagen. So we show that anyway, and here you can see us showing our posters outside the conference venue. There was, again, a lot of media attention about that, and after the story blew up in Twitter, social media, and also in the newspapers, then Oil and Gas Denmark actually decided to invite us last minute, to invite us to be part of a panel debate. And we got the chance to invite a scientist from here, from Lund University, Giertz and Dr, to offer a critical view in there. So this is what we have done until now, and our plans now are focused mainly in the spring, where there will be an international action week in early April. So we plan to carry out actions in every continent, mobilizing unprecedented numbers of scientists. We aim for 1,000 scientists in over 20 countries. And this will be timed with the release of the IPCC 3 report of mitigation and adaptation. So the summary for policymakers on chapter 1 of this report was actually leaked by Scientist Rebellion and Extinction Rebellion Spain back in the summer. And it's going to be officially released by the UN in April. We expect that it will be highly watered down. We will see changes after the governments have had their say on it. But anyway, the rebellion will be timed with this release. And yeah, how to join us, how to get involved with us. So this is a call out there to all scientists that are feeling paralyzed and are feeling maybe overwhelmed by the severity of the situation and by the lack of maybe options, the perceived lack of options for actions that there are. I would say we still have a chance. We still can turn things around, but we cannot do it. Any person cannot do it on their own. So it's time for collective action. If you want to join us, you can write your email in the chat if you are online. Otherwise, here we have a sheet of paper where you can write your email as well. For the Nordic group, here is the email address. And if you are not in the Nordic countries, you can join the international group. There are induction meetings every Monday in this Zoom link, or you can write to the email address as well, and then you put in touch with other scientists, activists in your region. So thank you very much. And yeah, this is time for this.
All right. So let's move on to audience questions. And because there's so many of you online, we'll start with questions from the online participants, and Patrick Nordbeck will take charge of fielding your questions to the panelists.
Hey everyone. Well, we've had a pretty active chat going too, which is great. I love seeing it. And I have about 9 questions. If you think of any during the course of this, feel free to write them in the question and answer sort of chat bubble in the center of your Zoom window. So I'm going to start with 2 anonymous questions. So the first question is something that we actually have discussed before, I know, that is important to talk about, and that is, what should international scientists on permanent visas, dependent on not being arrested, do as civil disobedience? Go ahead, Fernando. To the panelists, feel free to raise your hand or notify me in some way if you'd like to answer.
Yeah. I can answer it.
We have Fernando first, Anders, and then I'll give the word to you.
Thanks, Patrick. I definitely understand the situation. For many years, I was a researcher on an international visa, and it's a very sensitive situation. I would say what we encourage in Scientist Rebellion is to put yourself out there, but not sort of like if it involves, you think you're going to risk your job, perhaps there's other ways in which you can help. And there's a lot of support roles, as Charlie said, for a lot of the direct actions that we organize. So for the different direct actions that Aitzkoa mentioned, especially the teaching, which involved quite a lot of logistical support, there were several people that were out there blocking the street, but there was also a large number of people that helped organize the action that didn't put themselves in an arrestable situation. And those are very much needed. We need civil disobedience to create media attention, but civil disobedience doesn't just involve the person that puts themselves in an arrestable situation. It also involves a large group of support people that facilitates this, makes sure that people are well taken care of, that designs, for example, banners or art for the action, creates media attention, talks to the media, create social media posts. There's a ton of different roles that can be fulfilled if you don't think you can put yourself in an arrestable situation.
Thank you for that, Fernando. Anders, you would like to respond to this question as well?
Yeah, I have the same answer. There is no responsibility to become arrested. Scientist rebellion can't know the situations of individual activists. It's quite different. You have to evaluate that some persons are more threatened with negative consequences depending on their job and other situations and immigration status and all of that kinds. So you must think about how much you can do and want to do, and there are different roles, as we said.
That's great. Thank you for that, Anders. And Charlie, yes.
Yeah, just to add to Fernando's point, Pauline von Helleman, who's in the audience today, has written a very interesting paper, which I hope she'll paste. She highlights how many of the skills that academics have and take for granted are precisely the sorts of skills that are needed in activism. So, yeah, most of activism is organization, and you know, office skills, communication skills, these are what these groups need, and these things are very easy for us.
That's great. Yeah, Laura.
One of the things that we maybe as academics tend to forget, and there was also a question about what happens if you're more of an introvert nature, is that there's also a lot of empathy and care in activist networks. I mean, that's an essential part of being an activist, right? And to that extent, there's no competition of who's the bigger activist. Absolutely not. And you do what you can, and you step away and follow self-care principles. Those are really important, and those you also carry into your academic life world, so to speak, later on. So there's a kind of mutual cross-fertilization between becoming an activist, being an activist, or stopping being an activist. That's also okay. You can also just say, look, I can't right now. So it's really a balancing that you do, and you do that together with others. That's really important, I think.
That's excellent. Thank you, Laura. There's a related-ish question to this by David, actually, where David writes, I'm concerned that even though Europeans have been much more daring than American climate activists, there seems to be no major teachers on nonviolence there. Am I wrong? Do you have proponents of direct action but not nonviolence? There are always nonviolence trainings in the world that even mention that Gandhi always pleaded guilty, for example. So on the topic of nonviolence and care for fellow activists, is there anyone that wants to talk a little bit more about the nonviolence part of that? Go ahead, Fernando.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can mention, and this is true of both Scientist Rebellion, but also Extinction Rebellion. There's quite a bit of effort to organize group around what is called regenerative cultures and actually non-violent civil disobedience training. There's a lot of training that happens in order to make sure that everybody's on the same page about what it means, what nonviolence means, and how we respond when people in the street, when we create an action, might respond violently, and how can we best sort of diffuse the situation in one of these situations. And for some of these actions, I and several members of Scientist Rebellion went to some of these Extinction Rebellion trainings, and they were super informative. I have to say, it's very, I haven't seen any of that as sort of at the official university or academic level, but there is quite a lot of these informal groups springing up in both Scientist Rebellion and Extinction Rebellion that try to teach people about principles of nonviolence and regenerative cultures.
And I can just very quickly add to that this is one of my personal concerns that I bring up in both the sort of global or general SR chats every now and then, that we communicate internally nonviolently as well, and that the nonviolence part of this is just permeates through anything that we do. Again, on the care for activists and the openness and inclusivity of the organization, that's how we win, if you ask me. So great, thank you for that, Fernando. Right, so another anonymous question. On top of adding outward-facing work, what are your thoughts on pushing universities to teach and focus more on participatory research that involves communities in the entire research process and not only at the end? So working on the outward-facing part and from the start, and is that possible in many of the sciences that we are working in? So more inclusivity in the research process, Charlie.
Yeah, I think this is hugely important. Thank you. It's not an area that I am particularly specialist in, but there are lots of emerging ways of carrying out research where you have explicit outputs up beyond the generation of information. Built into the research process from the start. And of course, this is hugely important. I didn't focus on research at all in this talk because I was talking about what we need to do beyond our professional work. But yeah, within our research, of course, we all need to be finding ways to adapt our research to make it relevant to the emergencies we face. And that's not just something that applies to earth scientists, because as we saw, the climate and ecological crisis affects everything. There is not a sector of society that doesn't have to radically change, and there's not a field of academia that doesn't have major contributions to make to finding solutions out of this crisis. So yes, we need to change within our work as well as beyond it, and that's a very important point to make. Thank you.
That's great. Again, only also from personal experience. I'm a psychologist and I belong to the more mathy and physics parts of psychology than anywhere else, but actually becoming more involved in the climate research, but also understanding how broadly and fully this permeates everything that we do, including in our professional roles. There's of course no requirement that you have to change what you do in your professional line of work, but for me it became personal. So I am currently actually learning how to do more what we call qualitative research methods for this particular point. So I also think it's really important, but of course there's no demand or anything on any particular person to go this way. But as Charlie's talking about, it's very good to just think about and be aware of and let it affect your work. So thank you for that question. Some more maybe direct or practical questions. So from Teresa Santos, thanks for the fantastic talk. I was just wondering, you mentioned that scientists for XR and scientists rebellion have global reach, but how global are we? How much representation do we have? Do we know? Because the impression that Teresa's gotten is that it's mainly focused in Northern Europe and the US. So who would like to speak to the globality or maybe emerging globality of SR? Does anyone know? Go ahead, Lola.
I don't have a clear-cut answer to that question, as in numbers and figures of how many people are currently considering themselves as activists. There is an interesting dynamic going on in the, there's a signal group for global SR where people sort of pop up and say, you know, I'm based here, is anyone based here? I'm trying to organize. So there seems to be a dynamic going on at different continents, and that's really encouraging. But of course, we need to take into consideration that this kind of SR activism doesn't take place in a vacuum, right? So whenever you're a scientist, whenever you're an academic in an academic system that in itself is very fragile, takes place in countries where there's, you know, civil strife, where higher education funding is basically non-existent, then that puts activism in very different parameters than in, you know, comfortable Nordic welfare states, just to give an example. So the activism that we see there from scientists who are in very precarious positions needs to be seen, I think, in this context. And there's, of course, the big question of how these people link up to existing indigenous struggles, indigenous resistance struggles in different ways. So I think to that extent, yes, there's a dynamic that clearly shows that right now there's a sort of European and Northern American tilt to scientist rebellion. That's not necessarily a bad thing as it is. We need to make sure that we collectively link up to existing other climate struggles and sort of try and bring people in as far as they can, also on other continents.
Related to this, I think Kenneth and Sa, I apologize if I don't pronounce your name correctly there, is asking, for scholars in very dictatorial parts of the world, activism is more risky. So on the topic of what we're talking about, Laura, someone like me, like Kenneth, whose research is on literature on the Congo Basin. So what are your suggestions for people that are in these more precarious parts of the world? And how can we support them from when we're not in these parts of the world? Oh, sorry. Is that you, Anders, that have raised your hand and want to answer? There's a hand.
No, but I can answer.
Okay.
A minute. I think Aitzkoa had something to add to the previous question.
Oh, my apologies.
Yeah, sorry. Just on how many countries are actually like represented in SPAR. So I think that there are 8 African countries, and in South America there is Colombia, Panama, Brazil as well. Okay. So yeah, there is interest at least in these countries, and there are representatives and coordinators of these countries as well. Yeah.
Thank you, and apologies that I missed your raised hand there. Yeah, so back on this question of being in more precarious places in the world and how do we can support that at a distance. Anders, you said you'd like to speak on that.
Yeah, Scientist Rebellion is a rather new organization, and it's very positive that there has been an expansion and interest in the global south, outside Europe and North America. But we also must recognize that the options for action are very different. We are very privileged. I'm especially privileged because I'm retired and I have a basic income, and I don't have to think about negative consequences at my work and all of that. But scientists in other countries can be very much restricted. Think about scientist rebellion in China, for example. Yeah, can we think, is it thinkable even? But we, of course, we have a responsibility to support groups in countries that have greater difficulties than we. Thank you.
Any of the panelists that want to weigh in on this topic? Yes, go ahead, Troy.
Just to say very briefly that you know that it's an extra responsibility for those of us that are that do have the privilege and the security to be able to do these things.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that as well. And also back to the point that, like, again, there are no like requirements, and you don't sign something that say that you have to do this or that. It's according to your own individual possibility, but your individual possibilities are of course also affected by the constraints of your local government, your local geography, your local whatever. So of course this happens in discussion as well. Some people like to take more risks than others, and that's fine too. And whatever support that we can offer, of course, that happens. And also a lot in the communication between us in the chats, for example. Right. So how are we doing on time? Are we okay for 10 minutes? Okay. You'll interrupt me if you have questions from the audience, right? And because I can't.
Yeah, this might be a great time to take questions from the physical room here, and we have one.
Says I'm just wondering, like, the purpose of science, like scientists rebellions, like
the goal is to expand the network to the other continents, or is to get as many people as scientists involved in the disobedience acting to get more media attention. Also, Agnes talks about the possibility of doing like activism or disobedience in China, which is not within like within the acceptable social context, political context. But the scientists from China are also involved in a way that is contributing to like democratizing a scientific dialogue about climate change and also so on. So I'm just saying that also like there's an approach of doing activism, like a soft one and a hardcore one, a more vocal one, and also the disobedient, like a more violent one. So I'm wondering, like, go back to my question, it's like, what's the main purpose, the main goal of scientific rebellion in these points?
Okay, so just to repeat the question, question is, what is the goal of scientist rebellion, given that scientists in different countries in the world face really different contexts in which they can do activism? Aitzkoa.
Yeah, so the goal of scientist rebellion is to expand and get as many people as possible involved and do the kind of activism that they can in their context, right? So in Europe, the US, and the global north, we are aiming for people to do, let's say, like more high-level civil disobedience and things that will be disruptive and that will carry possibly risk of arrest and all that. Just to push again the conversation and push keep pushing forward. In other contexts, of course, we don't expect and it's not possible to do this kind of civil disobedience, but it's possible to do, as you said, like softer. To have a softer approach of democratizing the climate science and outreach and all that. So yeah, we want to expand, get as many people as possible in all continents, be truly global, but adapted to its context.
We have Anna's here.
Yeah, I think we must also think the other way, depending on the context the action is done in. If we take an action that seems rather soft and timid here in Sweden or Denmark or UK, and you do it in another country, it can be regarded as very controversial. And if we do our hardcore actions in those countries, you are just prisoned or something. So we must adapt what we regard as soft and hardcore actions is related to the context they are made in.
Thank you. And then we have Fernando.
Yeah, just follow up on what Anders and Aitzkoa said. I think it's a good question because it reflects that there's a lot of different problems with the system and they're sort of reflected differently in different countries. And the way we generally act in SR, as Aitzkoa had mentioned before, is that we're fairly decentralized because we try to adapt the general demands of SR to the particular idiosyncrasies of each country where we act. And this sort of points to the importance of organizing locally. So, I mean, it's a very international group. We exchange a lot of international information, but we try to adapt locally to the situation in each country, and so adapt the demands to the situation. In Scandinavian countries, we're perhaps more targeting governments supporting fossil fuel industries that are happening in, for example, Sweden or Denmark or Norway. Those may be different industries than the ones that are existing in Germany or Colombia or Brazil. So I think there's an important international aspect to SR, which is a lot of exchange of information and coordination, but at the same time, there's a local aspect, which is what are the demands, what is the situation in each country.
Okay, thank you very much, Fernando. I'd also like to contribute a question. By the way, my name is Clara van der Weert. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in political science. And I would like to ask the panelists, how have you personally benefited from being in Scientists Rebellion? We talked a lot about career risks, but what do you get out of it? Charlie?
Thanks. So Laura mentioned something really important, which was the regenerative culture that we have. I find I am better at doing the professional aspects of my job because of habits I've picked up from activism. So that's one important thing. Two, on a personal level, you know, you just meet the best people. Like activist groups is like a filter for the best people. So that's great. And it makes you feel good. So mental health, my mental health is better because I'm doing what I can. So I think that's important. I can't remember my other point. Sorry, I had another really important point. I'm sure someone else will have it. But yeah, it's good for you.
Let's go to Fernando and we can come back to Charlie later.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, on one hand, it's the feeling that you get after an action. It's just so much more rewarding than like a lot of the academic achievements you might have. Like I published several papers like over my career. Nothing was as exciting or like rewarding as having finished the teaching or some of the other actions we performed, because it felt like we were actually making a difference. And the other thing is, yeah, like Charlie's completely right. Like I feel like I run my own research group a lot better now that I've learned a lot about sort of principles of communication and decentralized action and collective collective organization that I got from activism. So I think it's one the sort of the decrease in climate anxiety from the fact that you feel like you're doing something good, and also just the secondary principles of ways we organize that are beneficial.
Thank you. And we have Anders and then Anders, sorry, and then Laura.
Yeah. I've been concerned about the climate crisis and the emergency for 5-10 years. And then I began for some years to study it more deeper, and I became more and more convinced about the emergency the more I studied it. And that period was about the time of my retirement, so I could choose to do nice things as a pensioner and try to enjoy life. I think it would be difficult to do it without conscience. So I think I would become rather depressed. Now I do something about it instead, and it's often with great enthusiasm, and it's very nice and good people in these organizations.
Thank you. And we have Laura.
Charlie, do you remember what you wanted to say? Why don't you go first quickly?
That's kind of you, thank you. Yeah, I just also wanted to challenge this assumption that being an activist is necessarily a trade-off, and you know, it does bring good things for your career. Being an activist has transformed my career personally. So, you know, as a conservation scientist, I worked on Madagascar. If you don't know about the biodiversity of Madagascar, you've never heard of me. But I now have a global reputation as a scientist activist. It's not my research, it's my activism. You know, I get invited on the media. I've been interviewed in Nature. I'm going to be profiled in Nature next month. Lots of opportunities that never would have happened for me because I have spoken out. And, you know, this isn't going away. We are starting these conversations now about the role of academia, but this is a ball that's going to keep rolling, and it's going to grow and grow and grow and snowball. You know, if you're interested in carving out a niche for yourself as a scientist, then this is not necessarily a bad thing for you.
Okay, let's go to Laura, and then let's take one more question from the online audience.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So to pick up on some of the threads that people have mentioned here just now, so the wonderful people that you get learning about activist tools, which is something that, you know, we should all be activists in one way or the other, whether it's climate change, ecological emergency, you know, whether it's feminist groups, whether it's anti-racist, anti-capitalist struggles. There's so many different ways we can get engaged. I'm not sure if everybody can go down Charlie's route and become famous in terms of also, you know, combine the activism and the research. I'm still a mid-range academic at a mid-range university doing mid-level research, you know, with an H index of just about double digit and whatever. Because one thing that I have benefited from in terms of my own understanding and in terms of seeing my own agency, I think that's the important thing here, is that we can combine struggles through this academic activism here. And someone also mentioned it in one of the questions, we academics, right? And we've all experienced the dysfunctionalities, the pathologies of the university as a system as such in our own right. Never mind which career level you are. And there are, of course, formidable challenges for early career scholars at whichever level you are. They get a little less once you have a permanent contract, but we know that the system is fucked, basically. And we know that everything else is soon to be fucked. So why not combine those struggles? And that's why it's really important to also speak out as academics and to link those discussions. And I think Scientist Rebellion, I'm a social scientist, so maybe, you know, we need more social scientists in Scientist Rebellion to make those connections and to speak towards all these decades of really interesting and relevant discussions about the neoliberalized university. You know, there are so many interesting and challenging and fascinating and hopeless discussions about the undercommons and going back to critical pedagogy and sort of linking up to bell hooks again and thinking about how do we challenge the ways we convey knowledge, or, you know, Paulo Freire's banking system of education. We need to challenge these things, because otherwise we can't get people out of thinking, you know, that this is normal and this is natural. And I think being in Scientist Rebellion has really helped me put words onto those kind of ideas and to see agency of challenging the normalization and the naturalization that I myself have fully internalized. You know, put me in front of a class, I'll teach anything. But now that you see that it is actually possible and doable, other people are doing it too. You know, you're not on your own. And even if it's not at your university, there are other people, you know, in your national context or internationally where you can say, yeah, but they're doing it. You know, I'm not the only one. I'm not abnormal. And I think that's really important. And that's personally, it gives me a bit of hope without the kind of utopian, oh, you know, everything's going to be better. But it's a kind of small scale, micro level nugget of hope that gets you along in your everyday existence, I think.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I'm so sorry, Patrick, but I don't think we have time for one final online audience question because we have 2 minutes left. And I would like to give a minute to Veronica here from Extinction Rebellion, who would like to tell you about an action that's happening in Stockholm. So if you can just take a little bit of time to say that.
Yeah. Do I need to do
Yeah.
that? Okay. Yeah. You can just hear?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I'm Veronica and I'm planning a mass action with Extra Sweden, a rebellion that will be in Stockholm from 25th to 29th of April. We will prepare during the weekend, and then we will rebel for 5 days, and we will block roads and cause as much disruption as we possibly can to meet our demand, or immediate demand, which is end fossil fuel subsidies now. And this is a quite small demand, but we have chosen it because we think we can reach it if we cause as much disruption as we can. And we will also talk about our 3 demands that we heard about before. And I'm just telling you this because I hear that you're extremely committed people. I came here for other reasons, like personal reasons and questions, but we really need you. We just started planning, but we need help with media, for example. I think you would be really good at that because you know what needs to be said. But we also need you to, we need people who can commit to do civil disobedience and know now already that they are committed to that. And I've seen people writing in the chat that, right, I'm ready.
So if people want to participate, they can just get in touch with Extinction Rebellion Sweden.
Yeah, exactly. So I will send some links in the chat. It's our email if you want to help out with specific tasks. And there's also a link to a pledge. So if you already now know that you want to do civil disobedience to the point of arrest, then you can write your name in that pledge. Yeah.
All right.
So
thank you so much
for that news.
Yeah. So upcoming action in April in Stockholm. Finally, would any of the panelists like to make a final note to wrap things up for today? No? Yes, Lara?
Could I suggest, I was just going to type it, sorry. Could I suggest that the people whose questions haven't been answered yet, just email us and we'll continue the conversation, because it's like literally all these questions, we don't have answers, we keep discussing them, but we've come collectively to a sort of way of dealing with them. In particular, the issue of, what can we do at our university, at our workplaces? There are, someone posted a couple of resources also in the chat. So the most important thing is to keep talking and to be in contact. So I'm just going to put my email in the chat, and Charlie has already posted his. So just reach out to people. I think that's the most important.
Aitzkoa?
Yeah, so just to finish, I would say thank you very much to Charlie for his excellent talk, and thank you to all the panelists for this wonderful discussion, for the audience for being so engaged. It's been so great to be here and so energizing. So looking forward to get things continuing forward.
Okay, thanks so much. I'll leave this meeting open for a while so people can exchange contact info. But yeah, thank you all so much for being here, and see you at an action.